always find it interesting about how early those experiences of racism begin and where they begin. Like I think of the first time I was always aware of racism all the way, as a I can't remember when I first became aware of it, but I know I was probably so young that, like, if you think of a white kid, they wouldn't have been aware that racism was a thing. But I remember the first time I outright experienced it. I was playing under 11s football, and a kid called me a black bastard.
What was your first experience of racism? Racism is a day-to-day experience, and this can impact on how we see and feel about ourselves. This is intrinsically linked to our mental health, and this can be a lifelong challenge bleeding into all areas of our lives.
Comes from the family, doesn't it? Like, sometimes, their parents might be like, where has that kid learnt it? And I remember how angry I was. Like, I ran across the pitch. I must have given him the biggest slide tackle I've ever done on anybody. Like, I was fuming, and like, even that anger stayed with me for years. Like, I think about that when I was 13, 14, I'd still be mad and like want to do these kids something if I saw him again. But it's just really interesting about like how early those experiences begin and how they do stay with you and shape you.
Welcome to Barbershop Stories, a series of conversations about the lives of Black men as they make their mark in the world, challenge the age-old narratives that society has placed on them, and pave the way for the astute and accomplished young Black men and boys who follow. Come join the conversation.
Yeah, afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon, guys.
Just to kick this meeting off, I'm Marvin again. I'm a firefighter from the West Midlands Fire Service, and I know it's a massive topic and it's quite an emotive topic to me personally, and I'm sure it is to you guys as well, on the topic of racism. For me, I've got to look at it kind of historically, really, from where we've come from in terms of racism being quite in your face. Particularly when I was quite young, and when you guys were young as well, it's quite open and quite pertinent, and you didn't really have to guess where it was coming from. To nowadays, it's quite underlying, it's unconscious, it's quite a sly racism, I'd say. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but
overt.
Yeah, overt. Yeah, and it definitely affects everything that we do. And in a way, I mean, me personally, I find it worse than, I guess, people being just blunt and just saying it straight to your face, when it's kind of done in the background, subtly, and you know what they mean and they know what they mean, but it's just done. I mean, I don't know what you guys think about that, but I mean, that's today's racism as I see it, in a way, really.
It's bang on. It's racism with a smile, isn't it? That's what it is. Yeah. Politically correct racism. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think I was probably lucky to not have to grow up with that like bum in your face, like people telling you exactly what they think of you. Racism. I think, if I think how my dad spoke about the racism that he experienced as a kid, like even as blatant as teachers being outright racist to him, compared to like how I see it seeping out now. I think online you still get that little bit more in your face racism, but face to face, it's very different, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. It's sort of like people aren't as much vocal in their sort of opinions on direct race, but they'll still imply with the things that they do, how they believe. So a massive situation where I saw like racism explode, like it hasn't for a while, was the whole Brexit situation. So when I noticed, when that was going on, obviously we all had loads of debates that were going on at work. I have no problem with anybody choosing like whatever they want to choose. It's more like the reasons that they were choosing what they wanted to choose. And you found that quite a lot of the people who wanted to vote Brexit weren't doing it for no other reason except for like reasons to do with race and what they believed and stereotypes that they had at other races. So like that was an example for me where people were very comfortable in the fact of they could say this because this was the current climate and this was what was going on. So yeah, that's another, you know, blatant piece of racism that I believe was going on, but it's more subtle than them saying we don't want this race in our country. It's more we're voting this way to influence this policy so this doesn't happen, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
A lot of the time they do it like that is because nobody wants to look like the racist. We know that you're all racist, and it's just some people are unconsciously racist just because of how they've been raised, but nobody wants the guilt of or the shame of being called or pointed out as the racist, even though the energy behind it still exists. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
I
100%.
personally, sorry, but yeah, I'm saying I personally prefer an outright racist. I don't prefer any racism, but I prefer to just know exactly where you are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hidden racism, and people, you know, when you can tell they're racist but they're hiding it, that's more, is it disingenuous? I prefer a straight up racist.
Do you think
That
though,
makes sense.
do you think some people who come across as racist are just uneducated?
Yes, most definitely.
So
I think there's people. I do. I think there's people who are uneducated when it comes to racism. But I actually think, as well, on top of that, I think that there are educated people who might not be outright racist, as in they might not think like they might not be like clearly racist. They might not think that they hold these views or something about a particular group, but they have. They'll say racist things or they'll think racist things, and you know you've got this strange phenomenon of people being racist and not even thinking that they're racist themselves, and that adds a whole other layer onto onto how complicated it is to tackle it.
Which is kind of what I was thinking. Is it like uneducated or is it ignorance? Because we live in an environment where there's so many cultures like in your face that if you're choosing to ignore like what's going on to still keep your sort of stereotypes and opinions, it's not lack of education, it's just ignorance to the education that's provided, sort of thing.
Yeah, because ignorance really is a choice. It's you choosing what to accept and what to not. But sometimes you have to look at it like this. Somebody might not be outrightly racist, but who were you raised by? Were they racist, and were their ideals instilled into you? And who raised them? Were they racist? You know what I mean? Because it's just it's one of the things that transcends. Right? Yeah, it transcends.
I think a big word Kieran just used there was believe in the stereotypes, because I mean I've had it personally myself, and we probably all had it where people believe you're a certain way just because you're a black man. You believe that they believe in the workplace. It could be in the gym. It could be just out on the road. They look at you as an aggressive man, or they look at you as a man with 6 baby mothers. You know, they just, and it's borderline ignorance, and it's just borderline, you know, media hype and, you know, pressures and historical ignorance as well, because the stereotype, I mean, and sometimes I've seen it as well with black people stereotyping other black people as well. Like for example, like only like the other day I was selling my car, and a black person wouldn't buy off me because he thought that I was, you know, a certain way, or I was going to do him something. And there is black people who believe the stereotypes about black people, which is crazy as well. So
that's historic as well. Sorry.
Yeah, and that goes way back to slavery days and divide and conquer and everything like that.
Yeah.
So
sorry, carry on.
No, carry on, jump in, Tash. Go on.
Now, to be fair, I was gonna switch to, well, kind of start talking about something a little bit different there. So well, basically, what I was going to say is that I always find it interesting. You know, we talk about like shared experiences. I always find it interesting about how early those experiences of racism begin and where they begin. You know, like I think of the first time, you know, I was always aware of racism all the way. You know, as a I can't remember when I first became aware of it, but I know I was probably so young that, like, if you think of a white kid, they wouldn't have been aware that racism was a thing. But I remember the first time I outright experienced it, I was playing under 11s football, and a kid called me a black bastard. You know what I mean? And that, like, kind of ties into what you were saying, Dan, about, like, you know, it comes from the family, doesn't it? Like, sometimes, you know, their parents might be like, where has that kid learned it? And I remember how angry I was. Like, I ran across the pitch. I must have given him the biggest slide tackle I've ever done on anybody. Like, I was fuming, and, like, even that anger stayed with me for years. Like, I think about that when I was 13, 14, I'd still be mad and, like, want to do these kids something if I saw him again. But it's just really interesting about, like, how early those experiences begin and how they do stay with you and shape you.
Yeah, I agree massively there. I think, like yourself, I've experienced racism as a child as well. And I've noticed as I've grown up, I've used that kind of anger and aggression on, you know, innocent people almost, or people who have not felt, you know, that racist kind of view towards me, just out of, like, a defense mechanism. I feel like, right, I've been called black bastard, this, that, and the other in the past, so I'm not going to have it again. So I almost put up a front as well. And I mean, when you look deep into it, I guess it does kind of affect your mental health, because those early kind of experiences impact who you are as an adult, I feel.
They definitely do. I think of just the other day, I went to my brother who had a dance recital, and I couldn't find a car park, and it was, where was it? It was like in the middle of Dudley kind of way. So you know, you have an idea of these certain areas, don't you? And I went onto this pub car park, and I went to the guy, and, like, the guy was drunk out of his face, he was sleeping. And like, I asked him for directions, and the guy just looked at me. And then I'm there, and it plays on your mind, because I'm like, okay, is this a racist guy? Is this just a guy who's drunk? Is he tired? You never know where it is, do you? You never know whether to think, is someone being racist to me? Do I need to react to this? Do I need to have my back up? It plays with your mind.
Just to chime in, I've got two experiences. One, when I was a little kid going to school, well, just around the way. I'm from Handsworth, generally. And as a little black guy walking around, we'd normally see, there wasn't too many white people around, but it was more the Asians. You'd see them either clutch their bags, cross the road, or the worst one is when you walk past and you hear the car lock. I mean, you know, when you hear the car lock, and that one used to always bother me, and the rest is because it's like, I'm not doing anything. You know what I mean? I'm walking, but that makes me feel some kind of like I'm criminalized or some kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then furthermore, like, for instance, when it's been raining, we all got coats with hoods on, but everybody else has got their hood on. When I put my hood up, it's a whole different thing. It's a whole, like, it becomes sinister. But I just don't want to get wet. You know what I mean? So I've got to consider, are these people thinking that I want to do them something? And then, sorry, just to chime on, years later now, my daughter, who's 11 years old, she does, like, perform. She would be at performing arts or whatever now, and sometimes it's around predominantly white people. So me as a parent now, going to watch my daughter do that, I'm around a whole lot of people that don't look like me. Now, nobody's directly saying anything, but the energy is there. Do you know what I mean? So it's just weird, because it's like, I don't know whether they're looking at me from a racist perspective, whether their minds are filled with stereotypes or whatever, not, but it makes me feel uncomfortable, because I shouldn't have to feel like that as such. I mean, I'm here to enjoy and celebrate what my daughter's doing, but you can't tell. I think as a black person, it's harder, because, like what you're saying, Tashan, you can't tell whether I'm in a racist environment or there's a whole load of paranoia and the rest. So you get what I mean? So it's affected my mental health whilst I'm trying to enjoy the show, because I'm around all these people. You know what I mean? So that was my little 10 pence on that.
Yeah. So for me, I was very lucky or unlucky, I don't know how you want to look at it, to never experience direct racism as a child. So all the racism that I kind of received from a child was always overt racism. So that, on the good side, I never felt like a direct victim. I always felt like it was a system thing. But then that has also made me paranoid to how many systems have always been in place or always will be, and how people look at me behind covers or when people aren't looking, if you know what I mean. But moving on to an adult, like within the workplace, there's been loads of times that I've had like direct racism put to me, or been in situations where people have expressed that they have racist tendencies, I should say, more
At
than
work though.
direct. So it wasn't like I was, how can I put it? So people, they will just express their stereotypes, and then what their views are on certain political issues, or what their lack of views are, or how they feel about what somebody else has said, or what another political leader's opinion on something is. They'll also repeat that. Or so, like I say, even that's not really direct, because it's not people saying that they are racist, but if they're agreeing with, you know, the opinions of another leader that's doing those things,
Indirectly saying
and then that always makes you always question the next person that you talk to. So say if I talk to Jamie at work, and they, after 3 months, expressed an opinion that this guy who's used to be in control of America has said something stupid, and they think, oh, he's hilarious, I love following this geezer on Twitter. That makes me question what everyone else is saying in here.
What do you really subscribe to?
Do you get what I mean? Yeah. Why has nobody else in the sort of office spoke up? And then that kind of leads you on to always questioning people's sort of ulterior motives.
Yeah, I think for me, on a day-to-day basis, it's kind of affected how, you know, how I even work with other Black people or around other Black people. Because, for example, at work now, if I see a group of other Black workers there and I go over to them, I'm automatically thinking, what are the white workers thinking? They thinking, look at that group of Black guys all over there together, like segregating themselves, or they planning something. And at the back of my head, I'm thinking, maybe I shouldn't go and stand next to them. And it's bad in a way. And even sometimes when people are talking at work about, you know, different women, and, you know, and anyone can, you know, relate to different women and being beautiful and et cetera, et cetera. But if it's just solely about one race of women, you feel a bit uncomfortable saying, well, in fact, you know, Black women are this and that as well. And I think that's affected me just in general day-to-day conversations at work. That is more time. And even as a parent, sometimes I think speaking to my son now, I'm having to talk to him about certain issues that he's gonna like, I guess, face when he's older in work, and not kind of warn him in a way, but just kind of prepare him for awkward situations, which, you know, in 2022 is really bad in a way to be still doing that.
No, I agree with that. I did the same thing with my daughter. Sorry to interrupt. I did the same thing with my daughter. She's 11 years old, and sometimes it breaks my heart, the conversations I'm finding myself having to say, because I mean, sometimes I wonder, are other races having to prepare their children for a certain scrutiny and a certain, let's just say a certain way of life? You know what I mean? I'm having to say to her, I'm having to warn her. It feels weird having to warn her about how also Black people are treated. You know what I mean? And obviously, I don't try to give her opinions. I let her see what's going on currently, because it's happening in the open. You get what I mean? But having to warn her about what it's like to be Black and how you have to kind of navigate and maneuver in the world, it is definitely heartbreaking.
No, it is, man. It is. It's awful. Okay, I will speak about my experience with that in a second. But okay, I'm interested in you because you said you didn't really experience like much, like you were lucky to have not experienced too much racism as a kid. But were you aware of it from the conversations and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, so yeah, I was 100% aware of racism. So I would say my first memory that I remember is I went to the Slavery Museum in Liverpool. So obviously I knew about slavery, I knew about it, but I feel like that's where when you see stuff, sometimes it clicks differently, if you know what I mean. So when I think I was about 7 or 8, I went with the West Bromwich Caribbean Centre. And yeah, that's when it differently like clicked in my head, like this is what's happened. And these people here actually chose to go over there and enslave them people and do you know what I mean? Like, I know people told me the stories, but sometimes it doesn't actually, you don't see in the flesh who done what to who, and that you are that. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's where it kind of clicked to me, like, yeah, it's not just stories, Kieran. It's actually like, these are still the people that are still doing that. And then, so for a long time after that, I kind of researched history and what actually happened. And like, the thing that after that clicked, and then I was kind of told slavery ended and whatnot. I thought, oh yeah, slavery ended, they freed the slaves, if you know what I mean. And then when I kind of carried on reading and read that they've kind of never been freed, and like those kind of systems that were used to end slavery were kind of still systems to enslave people that are still not kind of ended. That kind of, do you get what I mean? That kind of drove me.
Yeah.
And then
It's mad.
that's when I believe I became like conscious to all the kind of overt sort of racism. So I'd say by the age of like 11, 12, I was like fully kind of aware of what was going on in and around me, what people were doing, and what people didn't know that they were doing, if you know what I mean. So
Mad
for
thing is,
instance, now,
sorry.
you know, like when you're at school and you were putting seating plans and they were just scattering everyone that was friends. And when I say it was scattering the ones that were friends, it was put you all to the back and all them things.
Yeah.
These are systems that are set up from years ago that teachers still didn't recognize that they were still enforcing on people. Do you get what I mean? So yeah, I was kind of aware of what was going on.
It's mad that you say, like, you hear people talking about like white children and like, is it too young to teach them about racism and things like that? But we don't have that benefit, do we? We've got to know about that from the jump, because from you're old enough to be seen as a threat, that's the point that you need to be aware of it, innit? And I remember, like, for me, that was like, my mum would be talking to me about it when I was a kid, but I remember really when I was like an early teenager and I was starting going out, and it was like, mum would be like, okay, you need to make sure that you're behaving, you need to make sure that you're carrying yourself a certain way, you need to make sure if the police, you know, if you're ever around the police, like, you're not running away, you're not doing stupid things, comply with what they're saying. And to be told those kind of things as like a 12, 13-year-old kid, when you're just excited to be going to town with your bus pass for the first time, it's mad.
Well, I was just going to ask you that, Tash. Do you think that took away part of like your childhood, or like your innocence in a way, kind of made you an adult before your time in a sense?
You know what? I've never really thought about it like that, to be completely honest. But it definitely does, because it changes the way that you're perceived, and suddenly you're thinking, like I say, like, I think, like, I was never a bad kid, you know. I was always a very well behaved kid, but to be a well behaved kid and also be thinking in your mind, you need to make sure you're conducting and carrying yourself in a way that maybe the other kids, who, like your other white friends, won't have to, because they're not going to be perceived to be a threat, or they're not going to be perceived in a certain way. Yeah, I'd never really thought about that, but definitely you probably have to act a lot more grown up before your years, and maybe react to certain situations in a way that we'd expect an adult to react to a situation, where somebody who's another race wouldn't have to react to that. They're able to get angry, they're able to overreact, they're able to blow up, whereas we never really have had that luxury from the point that, you know, you're old enough to be seen as a man or an adult.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing for me. Like you said, other races, I mean, I think anyway, other races don't have to put those kind of defense blocks in place at such a young age. The children are kind of left to be children just a bit longer, without having to, you know, talk about how to react to police, how to react to certain things said to you. It's just it's in a way, it's almost, like I said, taking away part of your innocence in a way, but it's shameful, really.
That
Yeah,
what you just said kind of reminds me, it's a little bit left of what you're saying, but it reminds me, in going back to the word innocence, because I know a lot of people, black people, innocent people as well, and going back to the police, I'm not sure if any of you have felt like this, but when you're on the road and you see the police, does it sometimes make you feel like you need to sit up a bit straighter, or not do anything that's going to draw attention? It's like a lot of us, me myself, feel at that point like a criminal. I don't know why. Do you know what I mean? I don't even know why that is. Do you know what I mean? But there's something mentally not good about that. Why is that?
Let's say if I see a police car, I'm checking my speedometer straight away. Oh, am I going above threat? Am I giving them any reason at all to have to try and have a conversation with me?
I don't know if anybody else does that, like a white person, an Asian person. I don't know if they have that kind of consideration when they see the police, but I definitely do.
That's mad, because like only the other day, like I'd pulled up at the traffic lights next to a police car, and I felt funny even looking into, you know, like sometimes you pull up next to someone, you just have a quick look across. I felt funny looking into their car and just, you know, having eye contact with a police.
Turn my music down.
Yeah, turn your music down. Make sure you know you're sat up properly. You're not looking dodgy or whatever. And yeah, I'm not sure where that is a historical.
Yeah, because we know they just need a little excuse. You know what I mean? And then one thing unravels another thing, and then next thing you know it, you're in trouble. Do you know what I mean?
That's it. It goes back to the stereotypes again, isn't it?
And I think it's just interesting, you know, about how all of those things do impact your mental health, like seeing how police deal with our people, and seeing how it doesn't just happen here, it happens globally, seeing people getting killed, you know, where maybe somebody wouldn't get killed if they weren't black. I remember I was out with some of my white friends not too long ago, probably a year or two ago. And we just had a drink. We were all talking about it, and these friends, they work for the police, and we just got to talking, you know, about how the police are perceived, because they're like these are good people, you know, and I think they have to acknowledge that there are good people that you know are in those institutions. And they were really upset about like how they're perceived by different groups of people. But then like I got quite emotional, and I was like, no, actually, but what you guys need to recognize and realize is that for us, there are people who hate us for no reason, for something that we can't ever do anything about. I was crying, I got really obsessed about it. And it's just really interesting, like how all of that, everything that you see, everything that you experience, plays into even somebody like me who hasn't experienced a huge amount of racism, has been quite lucky in my life, in my career, but seeing all of that still takes a huge toll on you.
I think just a question for everyone, really. Do you think we do enough, like in terms of, like you were just saying, Tash, about our mental health, like in terms of how we feel and like those pent up emotions that have come from racism, or that, you know, lying there lingering in the back of our mind through racism? Do we, you know, it's always the thing that people say about black men in particular. We don't let our emotions out. We don't speak to people enough. We don't tell people how we're feeling. We have this kind of massive wall up against, you know, anything. And like you said, sometimes is it good just to like break down and cry? Is it good to just let your emotions out? You know, sit down with a counselor, sit down with your partner, sit down with, you know, someone who's a friend who's, you know, experienced in that field. I mean, do we do enough to help ourselves, really?
100%. In this community, we kind of, mental health is a massive taboo, as it is. Never mind, in the black community, mental health is a taboo. Never mind, in the black men, mental health. I mean, in the black men community. So in that community, it's even more of something that we don't deal with. It's something that I feel like, because we do constantly just dealing with stuff, it's just something that we don't even go to the doctors for something that we can physically see that's wrong with us, sort of. So never mind actually dealing with the unseen issues.
Yeah, no,
So I
very
feel
much
like,
so.
yeah,
Sorry to call you, bro.
no, it's all right, it's all right. But yeah, we really don't deal with what's going on physically, never mind what's going on inside our brain. So that's definitely a situation we could work on. How to start that? But yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely something we should work on.
yeah. I think more time it's because we consider expressing ourselves as weakness, and it's like sometimes, for instance, not to generalize, but sometimes women say, "Open up," but then what we're faced with is when we do open up, we're kind of either you see how the world treats men who express their feelings. You get what I mean? We're either ridiculed, we're laughed at, we're considered weak, or we're considered less of a man, and then it affects our own ego. Then obviously impacting our own mental health.
100%.
We don't express for those reasons, but then at the same time it has its negative impact because obviously when we're battling everything up, we're just going to implode and then have bad, poor mental health. Do you get what I mean? And it's going to obviously spill out and affect every other parts of our life. So I feel like we talk about it a lot, but we don't unify enough to find a decent resolve. We just talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely more that we can do. I don't think we talk about it. I don't think we talk about it enough at all. I've been very, very lucky. Anybody who's ever come across my mom's all about feelings. She's all about making sure you talk about everything. But even with that, you know, I never talk about it. Never talk about it enough. And I think part of it's because it's difficult to talk about. But then I think another part of it is because sometimes you don't realize actually you don't always need something to be done even after you talk about it. Like I feel like as a man, like I always feel like I need to talk about something because I'm looking for a resolution or I'm looking for something to fix it, for something to solve it. But you know, talking about the racist abuse or the racist comments that I see, that's not going to fix it. But what it does do is help take that load off of you mentally. And I think sometimes probably we as a community need to acknowledge, yeah, we might talking about it might not do anything, but it's still good for you because it helps shift that load. It helps. Yeah, we're talking about it together, and it helps remind you that you've got people with shared experiences, and that you're not alone in feeling that way, and it's okay for us to be upset about what we see and experiencing because it's hard stuff, man. It's horrible stuff.
But you know what? I would also chime in and say talking about it for too long without any kind of anything perpetual motion, it's like that also affects your mental health because it's like, oh, anytime you go to a certain meeting, it's like, oh, we're here to talk about it again. Nothing's ever going to change. We're just talking again. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I do agree with what you're saying, but there's also a flip side to it.
Definitely. No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think we're doing well in terms of, you know, what we're doing today in terms of talking about stuff compared to, say, for example, our parents and, you know, the people before us, because I remember speaking to my dad about why he never opened up or why he never showed any kind of emotion to me or my brother growing up. And it, like you're saying, Tash, it was almost like a weakness. It was like he said, like when he opened up as a kid, like he'd be like beaten up and, you know, it was just his defense mechanism. So he showed us not to open up in like a sense of like, I guess, trying to make us tougher in his mind. But nowadays, I'm guessing like the script is kind of changing a little bit, whereas people are understanding that, you know, it's okay to talk now a little bit about your emotions. You can't just be like the old black men of the past, very, very stoic and very hard-faced. It's just that doesn't work in a way, does it? And it's not worked for them because you see a lot of issues that, you know, they've got going on now. I see it myself with my own dad. And he says, like, he'll say to me openly, like he wishes he would have told me and my brother a lot more things growing up, just make it easier for us and just show more of a human side to him.
I feel like that's what it is. Like that generation of black men didn't really perceive themselves as wanting us to believe that they were human, or that they believed that they had to be that tough, or they didn't like have a, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
they couldn't like kind of let you into that sort of space.
You know what? I kind of had to kind of understand with that generation, because I'm coming from, like, my parents were basically in the 70s and the 80s. They were in like the Handsworth riots, you know, the riots that was around the place and the rest. So that was all racism ingrained, you know what I mean? And I've heard stories from my mum, my aunties and uncles about the different levels of racism that they were experiencing, the racism that they experienced from the police firsthand, and you know what I mean? So check it, they had it worse than us in regards to experiencing racism, because they're like children of, you know, Windrush, first, second generation or whatever, however it goes. So their level of racism, we were kind of spared it, even though we experienced it, because the stories that I've heard from them, like, they're extreme, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think all of those kind of experiences help shape, let's say, identity as such, because we're being raised by people who were fighting racism. So we're growing up already on the defensive, if you get what I mean. Yeah, it's definitely intergenerational trauma. We're growing up with, I grew up with a perception of the police don't like, I already grew up with that. It's just because it's what it was in me. Do you know what I mean?
Ingrained.
But yeah, it definitely shapes your perception and everybody else's perception of your identity. Race definitely does.
Yeah, definitely. And all those stories that, you know, like we spoke about the intergenerational trauma, sometimes it, like, I remember my dad had a friend who got killed in police custody, and I heard about that, and of course that terrified me, because I had friends who were getting, you know, held up by police and things like that, and it passes down, and you hold on to it, and it's really, really interesting and really sad.
Yeah, I think the next big thing for me is, how do we change it now for the next generation? Like I said, more so today, I think people are, you know, communicating better, allowing people to understand who they are and what they feel. But I think for me personally, to like really dig into and really help the next generation of young Black boys, we just need to kind of open their minds up, so they do realize that there is options out there, and you know, like the racism that we've felt and that our parents have felt isn't necessarily going to be what they feel in their coming years, or when they go to work and when they go to, you know, certain jobs and institutions. Yeah, it's still going to be there. Racism is never going to go. But for them to, you know, understand it is one thing, but for them to use it as kind of an anchor to hold them back, not so much nowadays, I'd say.
Definitely.
Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think another thing as well, well, I don't know if it's so much how we bring the people, bring the new people through, but I think just the way that the world is now in general. Yes, we know it's a little bit more covert and it's a little bit slyer now than it was back in the day, and you don't have that that in your face stuff. But I've even noticed how, like, I remember, you know, when George Floyd was killed, I went to the marches and stuff like that in Birmingham, and you'd see just the diverse range of people that are there. Like, even when I see people being racist online, sometimes it's horrible, but sometimes I find I don't even have to argue for myself, because there's other people who see themselves as allies who are there and are arguing. So I think the world's a little bit different now, and I'd like to think that in certain parts and certain places and certain communities, we do have a little bit of support from people who maybe there wouldn't have been that support there, you know, pre-1990, the 80s, 70s, 60s, and so on.
Personally, sorry, just to chime in quickly, I feel like if we just instill, you know, unity, knowledge of self, do you know what I mean? All of those kind of things, but we show them from a unified perspective, and we have to lead by example. And so that's one of the ways that we can show the next generation, you know, to really appreciate who they are and be unapologetically Black, is to lead by example and show them that we can work together, and we have to dismantle any stereotypes, because at the end of the day, we have to take responsibility for how the next generation who have been watching us, how they are, we have to take some kind of responsibility for it too.
100%. We have to kind of be that representation that we needed, sort of. So if we provide what we needed for the next generation, hopefully they'll be on a better footing, and then they can provide what they needed for the next generation. So yeah, that's what we kind of need.
Yeah, I completely agree with all your opinions there. Just a guess again from me, and in closing, I'd just say representation's a massive one. And just, you know, allowing young Black boys to feel like they have an identity. They don't have to fit in. They don't have to be a certain way. And I mean, a massive one for me is they don't have to live up to the stereotypes that have been passed down or been like cascaded down generations and generations. They can just be who they feel they naturally can be. And that's, you know, I mean, it's not even, I guess, a sense of even being around other Black, they can be themselves around white people, Asian people, Chinese people, and just feel as if, you know, they're worthy without having to like alter anything, for me personally.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Completely agree.
But it's just the how at the same time, because, you know, also as Black people and identity, that's a whole nother kind of worms. Do you know what I mean? So really, I think we'll get proper resolution when we know for true who we are, not who the history books or what slavery says that we are, until we really, really know ourselves. And that's one thing that we need to work on. Everybody, do you know what I mean?
Black unity, isn't it? Black unity, that's it. But again, thanks everyone for your input. I think just about out of time now.
Yeah, another the next conversation.
That's why
good hard hitting one, guys. Thanks everybody.
Respect.
Yeah.